All right, so while I'm not going to go over everything that goes into building the computer, I think there's plenty of videos online, even with this specific case and whatnot, about how to attach the motherboard and screw in the radiators and attach fans to the radiators and whatnot, plug in the power supplies, etc. I'm trying to highlight some of the more complicated pieces, and one of the other pieces here that I have not talked about so far is how I'm intending to set up my fan control and lighting. And there's lots of ways to accomplish that, but I am going for one particular method that I think at least is going to be the best one. It is a little bit complicated. As you can see, I've got my supplies here laid out on the table that I'll explain in a moment. In addition to, you can see I've got my fans in my case. So there's two aspects to setting up the fans. One is obviously the fan speed and control and direction and whatnot themselves. And then in this case, because these are QL120 Corsair fans, there's the RGB aspect. And I specifically bought these because they are the most ridiculous version of the RGB fans. They're the ones that have both a ring of LEDs on the inside and a ring of LEDs on the outside, and also on the front and the back, so that no matter which way your fans are oriented, you're going to get those LEDs visible. So the easier one first. I'll talk about the actual fan part of the fans, not the lighting part. The way that I have my fans set up, and there are 10, I don't know if you can see them. We got 3 on the bottom here attached to this radiator, 3 on the top attached to this radiator, 3 on the side attached to nothing. They're just in that spot on the case. There is a spot on the back of the case as well for air to come in, and there's 1 on the back here as well. This is not required to use this many fans. I wanted to fill in the case. I like the RGB. I got the distro plate on the front. So I decided to go with it. But if you had a distro plate on the side or something and just a glass plate on the front, you'd be fine with the amount of fans we have. So that being said, the other choice about the fan placement is what's exhaust and what is not. So right now, you can see here, maybe from a little bit far away there, the fans are not exactly the same on either side. You can see that there's this black kind of truss that goes in the center across the ones on the bottom and the ones on the back. You obviously can't see the ones on the top here, but trust me that the black truss is basically the back part. That's where the air comes out of the fan. I think that that's a pretty standard thing across different fans. So the way that I've got this set up is 3 on the bottom, pulling air in, 3 on the side, pulling air in, 3 on the top, pushing air out, 1 on the back, pushing air out. So obviously, if I wanted to mess with the positive negative air pressure based on the fan speed, I could probably mess with it, but I'm not gonna get it out of whack too much. It is on purpose. I've got 6 pulling in and only 4 going out. That is on purpose. I want more air kind of pushing out of the case than pulling in. As a result, dust should kind of stay away. I also chose this configuration because I like the idea of heat rises, so having the air in the case go up makes a lot of sense to me, as it's going to be hot air getting produced in here. It's going to want to naturally go up, so the air coming in the bottom and flowing out the top just makes sense. So that was pretty much everything that went into that. Now for the actual fan speed setup, I had a lot of different options, a lot of different choices here. These are Corsair fans. And that really dictates the direction that I go for all of the rest of this. EK made most of the components in my case, and they do make their own fans, but Corsair right now, as far as I could tell, these QL120 fans, RGB king, and that's what I was going for. Downside is that Corsair products pretty much only work with the Corsair software. And I'm not going to use the word necessarily proprietary for their connectors, because I've seen some folks on YouTube say that it's not technically proprietary, whatever. The cables are basically set up so you have to use their hubs and their ability to connect into your ecosystem, and then their Corsair IQ software when you're actually in the ecosystem, in the computer itself, to control these things. So because I have these fans functioning as the kind of backbone of my RGB system and fan system, I built everything around that. And I was looking for the ability to be able to control everything from one piece of software. That's my goal. I think that's pretty standard RGB goal, fan control goal, etc. But it's hard to achieve, especially in a build like this one that has a ton of RGB components. There, just to list them out, we've got RGB obviously in each of the 10 fans. We also have RGB in the memory. I'll talk about that in a moment. There's a little bit, some subtle LEDs in the motherboard itself. And then there's also the Lian O11D XL case has an RGB strip on the front. And then each of the EK water blocks and distro plate also has its own RGB connector. That's the mono block, the GPU water block that's not connected right now because I want to plug everything into the motherboard before I get it back in there, and then the giant distribution plate itself. So all told, I believe, I'll have to check my math, but I believe that was 14 different RGB items. It's a lot. And I needed to be able to control all of those and ideally have them sync up and control all of them together, and it's honestly a pretty tough sell. So I think I've decided on a solution. So as I said, built around the Corsair fans because I don't have a choice on those. What I do have a choice on is the other aspects of it. EK blocks, not really a choice, but EK doesn't force you into any particular software or anything like that. You have the standard ARGB header. So as long as you're able to plug that into something that's able to control it, you'll be good there. I have choices on plugging those in. They could go directly into I think it's the 5-volt headers on the motherboard, or they could go into some sort of head setup, hub setup, sorry. And so you've got a lot of options there. But with the other aspects, the motherboard and the RAM, I didn't have so many options there. Basically, if I want it to work with the Corsair iQ, they have this Asus basically integration built into it. So that was part of what let me go with the Crosshair 8 Hero motherboard, because I know that the iQ system is going to be able to control the lights on that motherboard. So motherboard, check. RAM, there's not really any easy way to get around the fact that the easiest way to do this is just to buy the Corsair RAM, so I bought the Corsair RAM. Obviously that's then therefore going to be able to be controlled by the iQ software. So Corsair RAM, check. Now the final components, meaning the EK CPU block, GPU block, distro plate, and then the Lian case all have, as I said, that standard ARGB header. So I had a couple options for what to do with that. And what I found, since everything else is compatible with iQ, I looked online, watched YouTube videos, etc., about what my options are there. And what I found is that there are some pretty innovative and handy people with soldering iron online that make this kind of thing, which is basically able to connect the standard header that's coming out of these four things to something else. In this case, the something else is going to be able to connect into the Corsair ecosystem, and then I'm not going to go into the whole thing itself, but basically the Corsair ecosystem, it's not that smart, even if they have proprietary connectors. Basically, if you just tell it that the thing you plugged in has a certain number of LEDs, and it'll just treat it as if it was one of their LED strips, for example. At least that's the way it works today with their current software and current hubs and whatnot. So the plan is to basically hook these things into the Corsair ecosystem and tell them that it's basically generic LED strips, and so it'll be able to control all those things as well. So with that in mind, this is how I'm going to do that. This is the plan, at least. And I did bench test all of this, so I know it turns on and the power is sufficient and whatnot. The idea here is, first off, the fans come in 3-packs primarily. Each fan 3-pack comes with one of these guys, which is an RGB hub. Now, don't get confused. It is, let me just check on my math here real quick, or not my math, but some of my notes related to what I picked up for RGB, because Corsair is seemingly on a mission to make this as absolutely confusing as they possibly can. So there's Commander Pros, there's Commander Cores, there's Commander Core XTs, there's Lighting Node Cores, there's Lighting Node Pros, there's RGB fan LED hubs, and they all look basically exactly the same, and it's like Corsair wants you to get frustrated and not purchase from them. But they make pretty RGB stuff, so we deal with it. Now, for this, the easiest way for me to show you is actually going to be just showing you the box to prove it. So I got 3 packs of these QL120 RGB fans. And you can see that on here it says lighting node core is included. That is that's very specific and very important if you're trying to pay attention to what I'm doing here, because lighting node cores have their own very specific purpose, very specific set of connectors, etc. These things, they take 6 incoming fan-based RGB headers, connectors. So this is one of the fans, for example. The things coming out of each fan are fan control and RGB. So one of those things goes into here, and the other one goes into whatever you're using to control your fan. And I'll show you how everything plugs in a moment here. But these things, as I said, they take 6 of these RGB connectors, and on the end of them, they got 2 things. One is power, that's easy. But the other one is not so easy or not so obvious, and this is the difference between this hub and some of the other ones. This is a USB 2.0 header connector. It is not a Corsair proprietary LED connector that can, for example, spoiler alert, plug into your Commander Pro or anything like that. It is a USB 2.0. There are only 2 places that this USB 2.0 is going to connect. One of them is into the USB 2.0 Commander Pro connections, of which there are 2, and the other place is directly onto your motherboard. Okay? There are other hubs out here that instead of this coming to a USB 2.0, it might go to Corsair proprietary LED header, which would be able to connect into this. If that's the case, it's a different kind of hub. Watch out. Easy to screw up. I did screw up part of this the first time. I will show you in a moment what I screwed up. Here we go. And the reason that that's very important, and I'll show you actually just right now what I screwed up, is that this special connector that I was talking about before that takes your generic ARGB header and converts it to something proprietary Corsair, you have options on what the proprietary Corsair is. And the first one of these cords that I bought was wrong. If you want to do something like this, pay attention, because I assumed that proprietary Corsair RGB was proprietary Corsair RGB, and it was equal. Wrong. There are 2 different types. There's the type coming out of the fan, and the type that comes out of their LED strips. So these hubs specifically take the fan thing, because they come in the 3-pack with the fans. But the Corsair Commander Pro that has these things they label LED 1 and 2, these connectors, you could not plug one of those fans into here. It is not the same connector. So I screwed up originally because I got special cables that connect my EK blocks and my case and everything to these guys, not to this. And I was trying to make use of these RGB hubs that I got with my 3-pack, so I had to return those and get these instead. So anyway, each of the 3-packs comes with one of these hubs. So I don't know how exactly they come to their math. I assume that they have calculated it statistically such they can get you to purchase the most amount of items possible to complete your computer. I'm cynical that way. But basically, I bought 3 of these 3-packs and 1 single fan in order to get 10 fans total. That's why I got 3 of these little hubs. You can see them here. That's what these are. 3 of those hubs. In addition to that, I bought one of these guys, Commander Pro. This is pretty classic. There are other flavors of Commander Core, etc., according to my notes there, but Commander Pro, it's a pretty classic central hub connector for the Corsair ecosystem. And it looks like this thing. And this has a whole bunch of different ports on it. So on here, I had already talked a little bit about it. It's got 2 of these pass-throughs for USB 2.0. It's got 2 of these LED connectors if you have some like LED strip or something from Corsair that you can plug into, or one of their other hubs, etc. But know that this, as I said, not the same connector as the fan RGB. And it also has just 6 slots for fan connectors, and that's of course the connectors coming off of their fan, which might as well be proprietary. And so they're able to just have fans plug straight into there. And then the last thing is some temperature sensors that comes with this. We don't have to talk about that. Temperature sensor does exactly what it sounds like. If you want to use that, you can use it. In my loop, actually, I'm planning to connect the temperature sensor coming out of the distro plate, meaning it's going to be the water temperature sensor that's in here. These are actually not proprietary. You can plug whatever you want into that. And then on the end of this thing, you've got power. You always got power. It's always one of the things. And then USB 2.0. So this thing plugs into a USB 2.0 header, and then you can plug 2 more USB 2.0s into this. So basically the hubs plug into here, and then this plugs into the motherboard, and it can control everything. So that being said, you may have noticed that I have missed out on 2 of these hubs to tell you what's going on. One, there's a third RGB hub that's not going to be able to plug into here. So what am I going to do with that? My plan with that one is plug it straight into the motherboard. Not everybody's going to have a motherboard that's the same. Mine has 2 USB 2.0 headers. So one of them is going to be this, and the other one's going to be the third of those. I tested that already. It works. So Ronnie from the future chiming in to say something nice and ironic here. You know how I just said it's easy to screw this up? Well, funny story. I was trying to use those 3 RGB hubs because I already had them from the fan 3-packs. But turns out, even if you use the fancy dongles, the Corsair IQ software will only configure the LEDs like they're fans instead of strips if you use that hub, and they don't work right. So FYI that in the end I did purchase a Corsair Lighting Node Pro and swap that in as the third hub. Everything else in this video is still accurate. It's just that instead of plugging my 4 miscellaneous ARGB items into that third hub, 2 went into the Lighting Node Pro and 2 went directly into the Commander Pro. As I showed you, there are 2 LED slots on that. Small bonus here, the Lighting Node Pro comes with LED strips, so I got to daisy chain in a couple of those into the system and attach them to one of the 4 ARGB components. So in the end, I actually needed the original kind of dongle that I accidentally bought, which goes to the LED strip connector type, not the fan LED type. Oops. The last hub on here is a generic fan hub. And actually, I may have misspoke a few minutes ago there when I said that these fan connectors on the Corsair Commander Pro are proprietary. I think that the fan headers are just fans at this point, because my plan for actually controlling the fans, RGB LEDs aside, is there's 10 of them, there's 6 connectors on here. Obviously, I could not plug them all into here. So instead, I'm going to use this guy, which has 10, 5 on each side, slots for fans to plug into. And then on the one hand, power, as I said, always power. On the other hand is it just condenses itself down into 1 fan header. Now, the downside to this, or to me it's not a downside, but people get confused about this all the time, is that depending on what kind of fancy hub you get, you might get control over every fan individually, or you might get just they all go at the same speed. Little hint, you can probably tell which one you got based on how much money you paid for it. So this one, for example, big fancy controller, USB 2.0 header, lots of control. Each of these 6 you can control individually. This guy, which is just a random cheap one I got off of Amazon, there's no USB 2.0, there's no fanciness. It takes standard fan headers and puts it down to 1 little fan header. So, as you might imagine, as you really should assume in this particular case, whatever control you send through this thing, everything plugged into it is going to go the same speed. You shouldn't be disappointed when you get a cheap fan header like that and it does it. That's pretty standard. Now, I'm okay with that because I don't see any reason that these 3 fans on the bottom radiator and these 3 fans on the top radiator should ever not be going the same speed. I don't know why I would ever want that to not be the case. So I'm perfectly fine. I'm going to plug all 6 of these into this fan header and then plug that fan header into slot 1 on my Corsair Commander Pro. So whatever speed I tell through the IQ system for slot 1 to go, all 6 of these are going to go the same speed. Honestly, I could then control all 3 of these the same speed too. I probably will, but I've got the slots, so I'll plug those into 2, 3, and 4, and then this guy will be number 5, and we'll be good to go. So all the fan control will be in here, and all of the fan RGBs will be in these hubs. 2 of these hubs will plug into here. The 3rd hub will plug into the motherboard. This thing plugs into the motherboard too, and everything is able to be controlled. And if I wasn't clear also, since I've got 3 of these hubs, 6 connectors on each, so there's 18 RGB LED control slots. I have, I think it was 14, something like that, number to control, which means I've got a little future proofing involved here as well. Because everything gets its own power, I don't have to worry about this guy pulling too much power on its own, which I was a little bit worried about before. If I used every single slot and a couple of the slots had splitters on them or something like that. I got myself a nice big power supply because you do have to worry about power draw when you have 400 or 500 LEDs going in the system. At this point, I'm not worried about it at all. My power supply is a 1200 watt maximum. It's an HX1200, also from Corsair. And I was mostly just worried about the individual hubs themselves potentially pulling too much power, but I'm not really maxing out anything anymore, and they all get their own SATA connectors. So everything should be good to go there. I am going to go ahead and try and set this up. Well, this is a mess, but this is the solution. As are these. No, not you, Eve. You're not the solution. You make messes, you don't fix them. So I assume the reason that you don't see the back of these cases in most of the other YouTube builds is that it's a freaking mess back there. I did spend a number of hours last night actually working on this. Cue time-lapse footage if you haven't seen it already. And at individual points, I would say it looked pretty good, but honestly, when it comes down to it, there is a lot of wires that you have to get back there, and especially if I'm doing this many both fans and RGB equipped fans and other devices, it's just, there's a lot. So it's going to fit, but it's not going to be pretty, in my opinion. I wanted to just real quick, though, tell you what I did. So I showed you earlier the different kinds of devices that I'm using for my actual lighting setup. There are 5 different hubs that are plugged in back here, as well as all the devices that actually need to plug into them. The approach that I took was to take advantage of the included SSD plate that comes with the case. You see these rubber kind of grommets on the other side. There's space for mounting. I think it's 3 SSDs. I'm not doing that. Instead, I used the 3M tape that came with these various hubs, and I attached 3 of them to the inner side of this plate. In addition to that, while I maybe could have fit everything on there, at least I could have fit 4 if I really wanted to, I thought it made some more sense to take advantage of these 2 drive bays that come with the computer case. I briefly considered not having one of them in here because I only currently plan on using 2 of the drive bays, but it seemed to be most future-proof to me to have both of them in there, plug the cables that come out of the back of these drive bays included directly into the motherboard, so that if any point in the future I want to use these are hot swappable bays. Well, I'm not going to unscrew it right now, but I would be able to just pull this thing out of here, put the drive into it, stick it back in, and not have to mess with any of these wires. That sounds pretty sweet. So I decided to put them both in here, and I mounted the remaining 2 RGB hub, RGB LED connection hubs onto the back of these drives. I put them right at the bottoms of each of them, so there's enough room to plug in connectors both on the top and the bottom. There's room between the two drives as well as room directly below the power supply here. If I was going to do something different, tip for you guys, if you wanted to do this again, I would probably try and leave a little bit, well, the thing you got to watch out for is the space between the drives is much bigger than the space between the bottom drive and the power supply unit. So make sure you've got enough space on the bottom for that power supply unit, as well as enough space on the top for the built-in drive bays, or built-in wires coming out of the drive bays. I did a pretty decent job. I basically lined it up at the very bottom of the drive bay, but I might tweak that. I might have tweaked that a little bit, slightly, depending on which of these I was actually dealing with, either the top one or the bottom one. Because the top one, for example, it had plenty of room on the bottom. I could have made it a little bit easier on myself if I had just attached it like hanging off the bottom or something like that, like half off the bottom. Could have even attached it directly on the bottom, I think, if you wanted to. But you've got some options there, more options than you had on the bottom one that's right next to the power supply unit, and this is the one I use to do my measurements. Also watch out when you're putting this SSD plate on here. I'm not going to mess with it right now, but it does overlap the power supply unit and the drive bays. How much is going to depend on what kind of power supply you have. This is an HX1200, 1200 watt power supply. It's extra big. Standard power supply is going to be a little bit shorter, so I don't know exactly how much it's going to overlap, but my rule of thumb was about an inch and a half overlap on here, just to the other side of these rubber pieces. So if you did want to mount things on here as I did, make sure you put them far enough over so that when you put this on, they don't conflict with your drive bays or your power supply units. So that being said, I went ahead and used my cable management tools, which in this case is my zip ties and my little clipper thing, to connect everything as best as I could. There's some excess, there's some not excess. Some of these wires are tight, others are loose, as well as restricted some of the actually built-in wires in the case. If I was to comment on one thing about this case that I like the least right now, overall it's a great case, but those wires are cumbersome. Those wires are serious. Like, there's a lot of them and they're big. Also, there are a wide variety of different USB plugs, and if I'm honest, I wish case manufacturers would either stop doing that or make them modular or something, because honestly they just don't match the motherboard at all. The motherboard comes with two USB 2.0 headers. You could look up exactly what the specifications on the Crosshair 8 Hero, but there were two USB 2.0 headers. There's one type of USB 3.0, but this is why it's very confusing. There's 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, Gen 1, Gen 2, and the combination of the three different types of USB coming out of the front just doesn't match what's on the motherboard. So I was able to plug two of the USBs in. One of them I'm just folding down in here, the one on the bottom, because there's nowhere to plug it into on the motherboard. But even best case scenario, assuming these work, they're going to be some sort of degraded speed because my motherboard generations don't match the front of the case. So that was a little bit annoying. But there's basically a lot of stuff back here. I've gone ahead and attached all of my wires both onto the hubs that I had on the back of the drives, as well as the three hubs that are on the back of this SSD plate. I have left all of my orange connectors here. I went a little bit overkill with the coloring on these things, I think. I used red for RGB fans, green for the fan headers themselves, purple for the RGB non-fans, blue for temperature sensor in this case, and orange for power. And so all of my orange right now is not plugged in because the next step is going to be doing a test of the system. I don't want to have any of the power on while you're doing a test other than to the pump itself, so that you can get, say, a 24-hour test of the water going through your loop, make sure there's no leaks. That's pretty standard practice for water cooling, is what I found. So all right, I'm going to go ahead and finish up this. Actually need to put the GPU back in the system because I had taken it out to finish one piece there. And we'll go ahead and try that leak test. Great.